Anna, a young, exhausted woman, was sitting on the edge of her bed, holding her newborn. The room was silent, but the tension was palpable. The baby cried, and the dark circles under Anna's eyes revealed the long journey of sleepless nights. She took a deep breath, trying to stay strong. The door to the bedroom swung open abruptly, and in walked Dona Marta, Anna's mother-in-law, with a stern expression. Without asking for permission, Marta approached, took the baby from Anna's hands, and began to criticize her. Dona Marta, angrily, "This is ridiculous. The house is a mess. Do you do nothing all day? I didn't raise my son to live with such a lazy woman. If I were you, I'd be up already, cleaning this mess." Anna, still fragile and having just given birth, tried to defend herself in a low voice, almost murmuring. Anna, exhausted, "I'm tired. I just need a little rest." The argument moved to the living room. Dona Marta led the way, always holding the baby in her arms, loudly complaining. Anna followed behind, trying to explain, but her words seemed futile. In the middle of the chaos, Pedro, Anna's husband, entered through the door. He noticed the commotion and, before he could say anything, Dona Marta intercepted him, manipulating the situation with her usual authority. Dona Marta, dramatically, "Look at this, Pedro. Look at the state of your house. I told you this woman wasn't right for you. The baby is crying, and all she does is sit there." Pedro, already tense and always seeking his mother's approval, looked at Anna with a mix of disappointment and anger. Anna, shocked by how quickly the situation escalated, tried to defend herself. "Anna, desperate, I'm trying. I just need a little time. Some help. Please, Pedro." But before she could continue, Pedro exploded. He stepped toward Anna, his pent-up anger being unleashed violently. He grabbed her arm, pulling her aggressively. Pedro, shouting, "Help? You can't even do the bare minimum. Now you want me to do everything for you." In a fit of rage, he grabbed Anna's hair and slapped her across the face. The impact was brutal, and the sound echoed through the room. Anna fell to the ground, her face marked by the assault and her eyes full of tears. The baby continued crying in Dona Marta's arms, who just watched in silence, not intervening. Anna, in shock and sobbing, left the house. The street was dark and deserted, and the night was cold. She walked aimlessly, her tears mixing with the light rain that had begun to fall. The scene was silent, except for the sound of her footsteps and the rain. Anna was destroyed, both physically and emotionally, but something inside her began to awaken. She stopped in the middle of the street, took a deep breath, and slowly, her look of despair began to transform into one of determination. Anna knew she couldn't continue like this. She looked toward the horizon, as if knowing that tonight would be the last time she would allow herself to be treated that way. Hey everyone, subscribe to our channel and comment on where you're watching from and what you would do if you were in Anna's place. Let's get back to the story. The next morning, the house was immersed in an unusual silence. The sun had already started to break through the gaps in the curtains, casting light over a messy living room and an atmosphere heavy with tension. The clock on the wall showed 9 o'clock in the morning, but it seemed as if time had stood still. The only sound came from the relentless ticking of the clock, echoing through the empty space. Pedro was in bed, lying on his side, motionless, with a tired expression. His mind was confused, still digesting the events of the previous night. He moved slowly, his movements heavy, as if he were struggling against the weight of his own body. As he turned, he noticed that Anna wasn't beside him, which, at first, didn't cause much alarm. He assumed she had gotten up earlier to take care of the baby, something that had become routine in recent days. He yawned, rubbed his eyes, and dragged himself out of bed. The house seemed quieter than usual. Pedro walked to the baby's room, expecting to find Anna there, rocking their child in her arms. But when he opened the door, he found the crib empty. The blankets were neatly folded, and there was no sign that Anna or the baby had been there recently. He frowned, a slight discomfort beginning to form in his chest. Pedro left the baby's room, heading slowly downstairs. As he descended the stairs, he felt a growing sense that something was out of place, as if the very air in the house was heavy with an invisible presence. The feeling was subtle, but unsettling. He heard noises coming from the kitchen, pots clattering and the muffled sound of someone moving objects, and followed the noise, where he found his mother, Dona Marta, busy preparing breakfast with an irritated expression. Dona Marta had her back to him, stirring a pot over the stove, her movements brusque and impatient. She seemed annoyed, clearly expecting Anna to appear and take care of the household chores, as she always should, in her opinion. Dona Marta's severe face reflected her rigid and controlling worldview. Pedro stopped at the kitchen door, watching his mother for a moment before speaking. Pedro, still groggy, "Mom, have you seen Anna?" Dona Marta didn't even bother to look at him as she responded, her voice filled with impatience. Dona Marta, complaining, she's probably around somewhere. That girl has a habit of making drama and disappearing when things don't go her way. She must have gone for a walk, or she's hiding, waiting for someone to feel sorry for her." Pedro sighed and looked at the floor. The slight discomfort he felt upon waking now began to intensify. He picked up his phone from the kitchen table and tried to call Anna. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried a second time, with the same result. Pedro furrowed his brow, now feeling a knot form in his stomach. He walked back to the living room, opening doors and windows, trying to find any sign of his wife. Every room he entered was empty. The furniture remained in place, but Anna's absence was like a palpable void in the house. Dona Marta, still in the kitchen, continued muttering to herself, grumbling about Anna's irresponsibility. She banged a metal spoon against the sink with force, interrupting her own thoughts. Dona Marta, impatiently, raising her voice, "I told her that this behavior wouldn't lead anywhere. Now, Pedro, listen, you need to be firm. You're letting her control things her way. This can't go on." Pedro didn't respond. His mind was increasingly distracted, with a growing concern about Anna's whereabouts. He walked to the front door and looked outside, hoping to see her walking back home, but the street was empty, with only a few dry leaves being blown by the wind. The sky was clear, without clouds, and the sunlight contrasted with the growing sense of unease Pedro was feeling. Returning inside, he began to search the house more urgently. He opened closets, checked the rooms, and even glanced at the backyard. No sign of Anna. The discomfort that had previously been just a feeling was now turning into real worry. He went back to the kitchen, finding his mother now sitting at the table, sipping coffee while flipping through a magazine with disinterest. "Pedro, more worried, Mom. She's nowhere to be found. I don't know where she went." Dona Marta looked up from the magazine and stared at him with a raised eyebrow, still not showing much concern. "Dona Marta, what do you mean? Of course she's here. She's probably hiding, waiting for you to go after her, like always." Pedro shook his head but didn't reply. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. He picked up his phone again and tried to call Anna, this time waiting a little longer. Once again, the call went to voicemail. He left a voice message, his tone now more tense. "Pedro, on the phone, Anna, where are you? Please come home. Let's talk, okay?" He hung up the phone and sat on the couch, rubbing his face with his hands. Dona Marta watched him from a distance, sensing her son's growing discomfort. Now she was starting to feel a bit uneasy too, though she wouldn't admit it. The silence that had previously seemed just a part of the morning routine was now becoming oppressive. No sound from the baby, no movement from Anna. The silence seemed to grow louder with every passing second until an external noise broke the tension. A muffled sound, coming from the direction of the front door. Pedro stood up, feeling his heart rate quicken slightly, and walked toward the door. He opened it slowly, perhaps expecting to find Anna outside. But what he found was something completely different. Stuck to the door with tape was a white envelope with his name written by hand. The handwriting was Anna's. For a moment, Pedro just stood there, staring at the envelope as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He exhaled slowly, his fingers trembling slightly as he tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message, written in firm but emotionally charged handwriting. Pedro read the words in silence, but Anna's voice echoed in his mind as he processed each sentence. "I'm not going to live like this anymore. I won't allow you or your mother to treat me like nothing. I've left, and things are going to change from now on." The life you knew is over. Take care. Pedro read the letter again, this time out loud, still in disbelief. The world around him seemed to unravel. He felt as if the ground beneath his feet was giving way, as if everything he knew was crumbling before his eyes. He looked outside, hoping to see Anna or some clue about where she had gone, but the street remained empty. He held the letter tightly, his fingers crumpling the paper as he tried to process what he had just read. Dona Marta approached, now clearly worried about what was happening. She took the paper from Pedro's hand and read it quickly, her face twisted in anger. Dona Marta, shouting, "How dare she? How can she leave us like this? Pedro, you need to bring her back. This is ridiculous." Before either of them could react, a distinct sound interrupted the argument. The sound of a car stopping in front of the house. Pedro looked out the window and saw a police car pulling up to the curb. Two officers stepped out of the car and walked toward the door. Pedro felt his stomach turn. He didn't understand what was happening. The officers reached the door, and the older one, with a serious expression, looked directly at Pedro. "Police officer, Mr. Pedro, we have a warrant for your arrest for assault. We need you to come with us." The shock hit Pedro like a wave of panic. He looked at the officers, then at his mother, and tried to protest, his words coming out in a confused and desperate rush. "Pedro, desperate, this must be a mistake. I didn't do anything. You don't understand, The officers moved closer, one of them pulling out handcuffs. They weren't interested in hearing explanations at that moment. Within seconds, Pedro was handcuffed in front of his own house, with his mother watching, helpless and in shock. Dona Marta tried to intervene, yelling at the officers, but she was completely ignored. "Dona Marta, desperate, what are you doing? He's innocent. Let my son go." The officers continued their work efficiently, leading Pedro toward the patrol car. As he was placed in the back seat, Pedro looked back at his house and realized that everything he knew was falling apart. Anna was truly gone, and the life he had known would never be the same again. The police car slowly drove away, while Dona Marta stood at the door, unable to believe what had just happened. The house, once full of noise and conflict, was now empty. The silence was absolute. The control she and her son once had over Anna had completely slipped away, and for the first time, Dona Marta felt powerless. Anna walked slowly to the courthouse, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the corridors. She sat next to her lawyer, Dr. Laura, while watching Pedro at the defendant's bench. He was handcuffed, his posture slumped, his head bowed, avoiding Anna's gaze. His worn-out expression and the toll of months spent in pretrial detention were evident, and the aggression that once radiated from him seemed to have drained from his body. Dona Marta, seated in the front row, barely concealed her anger and disapproval, her eyes fixed on her son as if expecting him to react and turn the situation around. The judge entered the room, and everyone stood, except Pedro, who remained seated, the handcuffs restricting his movements. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as though everyone knew something profound and irreversible was about to happen. "We are here today to judge the case of assault and domestic violence against the defendant, Pedro." The judge's voice was firm but calm as he read the details of the case. Anna listened to each word, feeling the weight of the memories. She closed her eyes for a moment, and in her mind, flashes of the night of the assault played like a film. The slap, the scream, the pain. She took a deep breath, opening her eyes, determined not to let the emotions overwhelm her in this crucial moment. Pedro's lawyer stood up, asking for permission to make an opening statement. He attempted to soften Pedro's image, claiming that the events of that night were the result of a heated argument that got out of control, describing Pedro as a pressured, exhausted, and emotionally overwhelmed man. He argued that Pedro had always been a dedicated father, that the recent pressures of work and fatherhood had created a moment of weakness, and that this was not his client's usual behavior. Anna listened to every word with a mixture of disbelief and contained anger. A moment of weakness, she thought. Her hands clenched into fists beneath the table. She wanted to shout, to interrupt, but Dr. Laura gently placed a hand on her arm, as if to say, "Calm down, our turn will come." Pedro's lawyer continued, suggesting that Pedro had been going through a difficult phase and that Ana leaving the house that night only escalated the situation. He was desperate. He believed his wife was abandoning him and that his family was falling apart. Who wouldn't lose control in such a situation? He concluded, looking at the jury as if hoping they would sympathize with Pedro. Now it was Dr. Laura's turn. She stood up and walked to the center of the room. There was an absolute silence as everyone waited for her words. What we've just seen is an attempt to humanize violence, to try and justify the unjustifiable. Yes, we all have moments of weakness, but nothing, absolutely nothing, justifies physical violence, threats, or the emotional abuse of a person who should be protected, loved, and respected. Dr. Laura spoke with controlled firmness, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the jury, the judge, and Pedro, who still avoided looking at Ana. She continued, Ana wasn't just the victim of a moment of weakness. Ana was the victim of months, perhaps years, of manipulation, control, and intimidation by Pedro. And that night, when everything culminated in physical assault, Ana did the only thing anyone in her position would do. She fled to save herself and her child. Dr. Laura then presented the evidence. Photos taken right after the assault, showing Ana's swollen and bruised face. Text messages from Pedro sent in the weeks leading up to the incident, filled with cold and threatening language. Testimonies from neighbors who had heard the screams and the sound of objects breaking that night. Each piece of evidence was like a blow to the already fragile defense's argument. Pedro's lawyer tried to intervene, suggesting that Ana had also contributed to the tense environment. He insinuated that she had provoked the argument, suggesting that her departure was an act of irresponsibility, not a flight for survival. Ana stood up, permitted by the judge, and walked to the witness stand. She was nervous but steady. I never provoked anything, she began, her voice initially trembling but gaining strength as she spoke. I was exhausted, taking care of a newborn, trying to balance a life that was falling apart around me. And that night, when I asked for help, when I begged for understanding, I got a slap in the face. I was yelled at. I was treated like trash. I wasn't a provocateur. I was a victim. Ana's words hung in the air. The courtroom was silent, and even Pedro's lawyer hesitated for a moment before continuing. And why didn't you call the police? He asked, attempting to suggest that her flight was hasty. Ana looked directly at him. Because I didn't trust they'd get there in time, she responded, her voice now solid as a rock. Because I knew that if I stayed, the next assault could be worse. And maybe next time, it wouldn't just be a slap. Dr. Laura seized the moment. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what we're discussing here isn't just an isolated incident. This is about patterns of behavior, about a culture of control, about years of emotional and physical abuse, masked by moments of superficial regret. Pedro finally lifted his head, his eyes fixed on Ana, but there was no more control, no more power. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the words wouldn't come. He knew the control he once had over her was gone. He knew that anything he said now would only confirm what everyone in the room already knew. Dona Marta, seated behind, began muttering something to herself in desperation. She looked at her son, searching for a way to intervene, to salvage what remained of his image, but it was too late. The courtroom was not the stage where she could exert her dominance. The judge asked for Dr. Laura's closing statement, and she slowly walked toward the jury. Ana was strong enough to escape. She was brave enough to face her abuser, knowing full well that those around her would try to silence her. Pedro broke the trust, the respect, and the dignity of his wife that night. And today, justice demands that he be held accountable. After long hours of the hearing, the judge finally asked the jury to retire for deliberation. The room fell into a heavy silence as everyone waited for the verdict. Ana remained seated, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the floor, avoiding Pedro's gaze. Time seemed to stretch on as the jury deliberated. Minutes passed, maybe hours, until the group finally returned to the courtroom. The judge observed them, the anticipation growing in each person present. Ana lifted her gaze, her heart pounding. The jury's foreperson stood, holding the verdict in hand. The silence was suffocating as they spoke. Based on the evidence presented, we, the jury, find the defendant, Pedro, guilty of assault and domestic violence. Anna exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. A wave of relief washed over her, but it was accompanied by a deep sadness. This wasn't a victory, not in the way she had imagined, but it was justice. It was the release from years of abuse and pain. The judge ordered that Pedro be taken back to prison to await sentencing. The handcuffs were resecured around his wrists, and he was escorted out of the courtroom. His eyes met Anna's one last time, but she didn't look away. For the first time, she felt that he no longer had power over her. Dona Marta screamed, trying to stand, but was restrained by one of the officers who urged her to calm down. She looked at her son being taken away, then at Anna. Her eyes filled with hatred, as if all of this were Anna's fault. But Anna wasn't shaken. She had endured the worst, and nothing Marta said or did could change what had already been done. As Pedro was finally led out of the room, Anna felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Dr. Laura placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of support. Anna thanked her with a nod, and together they left the courthouse. Outside, the sun shone brightly, in stark contrast to the dark months Anna had faced. She took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill her lungs. Every step she took from that moment on was a new chance, a fresh start. She looked up at the sky, as if she could finally see a way out of all the darkness she had endured. Anna picked up her phone and called her friend, who was caring for her child. "I'm coming home," she said, a soft smile on her lips. The sun was beginning to set as Anna left the courthouse, with a gentle breeze brushing against her face. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt as though the weight she had been carrying was starting to lift. The court's decision had been clear. Pedro was found guilty and would now face the legal consequences of his actions. Still, Anna's true liberation didn't come just from formal justice. It was something deeper, an emotional release, the certainty that she was finally free. She walked toward the street, where Mariana, her best friend, was waiting in the car with her baby. As soon as Mariana saw Anna approaching, she got out of the car and ran to hug her. Anna returned the hug tightly, closing her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of friendship and support. Mariana, whispering, "You did it, Anna. It's over." Anna took a deep breath, feeling the truth of her friend's words. She wasn't sure she truly believed it until that moment. There was still so much to process, many scars left to heal, but yes, an important chapter of her life had indeed come to an end. She stepped back from the hug, looking at Mariana with a small but genuine smile. Anna, calmly, "Yes, it's over." Finally, Mariana opened the car door for Anna to get in. Inside, Anna's baby was peacefully sleeping in the back seat, his angelic face calm, oblivious to everything that had happened. Seeing him, Anna felt a wave of emotion. She approached slowly, gently touching his little face, her hand trembling slightly. Anna, thinking aloud, "I did this for you." Anna's journey had been long, and the memories of the violence and pain were still fresh in her mind. She knew that she would still face challenges, especially emotional ones. However, her decision to leave Pedro, to face her own vulnerability, and to report the abuse had made her realize something that was beginning to blossom within her. A sense of inner strength. For so long, she had been oppressed, manipulated, and controlled that she had forgotten who she truly was. Now, as she looked at her son, she knew that she wasn't just a survivor of abuse. She was a mother, and she was strong. On the drive home, the city lights began to shine, casting soft shadows on the streets. Anna looked out the window, seeing the buildings, the people hurrying by, and for the first time in a long while, she felt that she could be part of that world again. The emotional isolation she had felt over the past few years was beginning to fade. It was as though she was emerging from a long, dark tunnel, finally seeing the light on the other side. Mariana, breaking the silence, "What are you going to do now, Anna? How do you feel?" Anna took a few seconds to respond, still processing the question. She had never really thought about the after. For so long, all she could focus on was getting out of the situation, protecting her child, and surviving. But now that it had happened, she was free to think about the future. "Anna, reflective, I think I need time." I need to figure out what I want to do with my life now. But above all, I need to make sure my son has a safe home, a place filled with love and respect. That's all I ever wanted. And now it's possible. Mariana nodded, keeping her eyes on the road. But the smile on her face showed her relief in seeing Anna start to think about the future, even if cautiously optimistic. Anna knew that there was a long road ahead, but just having the space to think about herself and her own happiness was a huge step. When they arrived at Mariana's apartment, Anna carried her baby inside, gently placing him in the makeshift crib her friend had set up for them. She watched her son sleep for a few minutes, letting the peace of the moment soothe her heart. It was such a stark contrast to the chaos of her previous life that Anna could hardly believe that now, indeed, everything could be different. As she moved around the house, organizing the few things she had brought, her mind wandered. Thoughts of Pedro inevitably returned, like ghosts she still couldn't fully expel. His face in the courtroom, pale and defeated, was a difficult image to forget. He had been the center of her life for so long, the man who had promised love but delivered pain. There were moments when she wondered if, in some way, she had failed him, if there was something she could have done differently to avoid the disaster. But then she remembered. It wasn't her fault. Pedro had made his choices, and those choices had led them here. That night, while Mariana slept in the room next door, Anna stayed awake, thinking. She thought about everything she had lost, but also everything she had gained. She knew she wasn't completely healed, but she was on the right path, and that was enough for now. In the weeks that followed, Anna began to rebuild her life. She looked for a new place to live with the help of Mariana and other friends who had learned about her situation. They supported her in ways Anna could never have imagined. Slowly, she started creating a new routine for herself and her son. The emotional pain still surfaced from time to time, in random moments. A sudden memory of an argument with Pedro, the sound of something breaking, or a dream that made her relive that night. But as each day passed, those moments became less frequent. One day, while sitting in a small park near her new home, Anna watched her son play on the grass, laughing with the toys she had brought. It was a simple scene, but it was incredibly meaningful to her. For so long, she had feared that he would grow up in a violent environment, watching her suffer, perhaps even replicating his father's behavior. But now, she knew she was creating something different. She was giving him the chance to have a happy, safe childhood. And, perhaps more importantly, she was allowing herself to be happy again. She felt a presence beside her, and when she looked up, she saw Mariana approaching with 2 cups of coffee. She smiled and sat next to Anna on the bench, offering her one of the cups. Mariana, playfully so, "Ms. Newlife, how are we today?" Anna laughed, accepting the coffee. Anna, with a peaceful smile, "I think I'm good." Finally good. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the park around them. It was a comfortable silence, full of mutual understanding. Anna thought about all the times she had felt alone, isolated in the midst of her previous life, even surrounded by people. Now, she realized she didn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. She had friends, she had support, she had a safety net in case she fell again. But there was another question still lingering in her mind. Pedro. He was in prison, and as much as she wanted to move on, she knew he was still part of her story. Dona Marta, for her part, had tried contacting Anna a few times, but Anna never responded. She knew that Marta would likely try to manipulate the situation or even blame Anna for what had happened to Pedro. And Anna wasn't ready, nor willing, to deal with that now. One day, weeks after the trial, Anna received a letter. It was from Pedro, handwritten. She hesitated to open it, but deep down, she knew she needed to see what he had to say. Sitting in her new living room, she took a deep breath and tore open the envelope. "Anna, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say some things. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I'm not sure I deserve it. What I did to you was unforgivable. I thought about writing many times before, but I couldn't find the words. The truth is, I was wrong. I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to describe. What happened between us? I destroyed everything. I'm here now, thinking about all the decisions I made and what brought me to this point. I know I blamed you many times, but I never had the courage to look at myself and see who I had become. I'm trapped, both physically and emotionally. Every day, I think about how things could have been different, but I know I can't change the past. I wanted you to know that I'm trying to be a better person, even though it may not change anything for you. I just wanted you to know. I hope that you and our son have a better life. A life without me. It's what you both deserve. Pedro. Anna closed the letter with trembling hands, a whirlwind of emotions flooding her mind. Tears ran down her face, but they weren't tears of longing or lost love. They were tears of closure. For the first time, Pedro had acknowledged what he had done. It wasn't enough to change the past, but it was enough for her to finally close that chapter. She stood up, placed the letter in a drawer, and walked over to the crib where her son was sleeping. The look on her face was one of peace. A new beginning. She had survived hell and emerged on the other side, stronger than she ever thought possible. And from that moment on, she was ready to live her life fully. And if you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to receive impactful stories every day. Big hugs.